Education Secretary Nadeem Sahawi has today warned teachers not to teach white privilege as if it's a fact. I might suggest they shouldn't teach it at all. Let's talk to Chairman of the Campaign for Real Education, Chris McGovern. Good evening, Chris.
Evening, Kevin.
I mean, I applaud Nadim Zahawi for, as it were, going there. At least he said, look, you shouldn't be teaching white privilege as a fact. As I said just then, perhaps they shouldn't be teaching it at all. He goes on to say, because the thing about white privilege is it is a contested view. I think it's more than a contested view. I think it's a pile of claptrap, divisive, pernicious claptrap. What was it ever doing in our schools being taught in the first place?
Big question, isn't it, really? It's a very divisive, it's a racist term. And, I'm half Irish, and I have to say that we go back to the 19th century, when Ireland was part of the United Kingdom, about 1 million or so of my family and fellow countrymen, they died of starvation. They were white UK citizens. So in terms of suffering, the whites have got it over the blacks in the country, that you like. But look, we shouldn't be seeing anything in terms of race, because yet there's underprivileged in this country. But the people at the bottom of the pile, education at least, and that's my field, they're the white working class. And I work with those. I work with these kids. I work with the parents. A lot of these parents, for example, can't read and write. They've got these kids who are failing. And yeah, I applaud the immigrant community because they're doing very well. We've got a problem in this country. It's not to do with white privilege. It's to do with white underprivilege. It's the white working class who are failing. And, 3 cheers for the immigrant community, but they're doing pretty well.
And how bemused must some of these white working class kids be? Because it is a socially recorded fact that among our least privileged people are the white working class, especially the kids. How bemused must they be sitting in classrooms when teachers are telling them that because of the colour of their skin, they're very privileged? They're just not. Privilege has got nothing to do with skin colour.
No, we've got to teach children, and most children understand this, that basically you treat other people as you want to be treated. White people, black people, it doesn't matter. We're all the same. And, sometimes there's an idea that somehow white people are capable of evil, which black people aren't. No, we're all equally capable of good things and bad things, white or black. It doesn't really matter. And if you're a poor white working class kid, and as I say, I work with these kids now I've retired after 35 years teaching, they're just kids with the sparkle in their eye. They want to get on. And if you're telling them, and they're in poverty often, that actually they're privileged, this is cruel. This is an insult. And actually, if you talk to children sensibly, black or white, they understand this. So these people with a very political, racist agenda telling us about white privilege, they're dividing society. They're the people causing racial hatred. We want our community to stand together, to work together, black or white. Yes, there's been problems in the past. White people have suffered. Black people have suffered. We've all suffered in the past. But now we've got to work together, look to the future. So looking back all the time and saying, in the past, black people suffered. Yeah, we've all suffered. And as I say, a lot of white working class people have suffered over the centuries. There are privileged white people. There are privileged black people. But we've got to work together as a country. We've got to stick together. And these poor kids, the bottom of the pile, the white kids being told they've got to carry the guilt. But it's cruel and it's abusive.
Zahawi says that schools have a legal duty to maintain political impartiality. Fair enough. I just think that although I applaud his stance on this, I think his language was too mild. And the question I would like to ask is, how did this get into the classroom in the first place? How did we come to a point where there are teachers up and down the length of this country teaching kids white privilege as if it's a fact? That's a disgrace. That's a scandal, isn't it?
It is, and you can go back 30 years. I'm chairman of the Campaign for Real Education. 30 years ago, I was advising Margaret Thatcher, and I also advised other prime ministers, telling them, you know where this country is going with education? It's going to become divisive. It's going to go in the direction it has now reached, which is, we're teaching white privilege. How have we got there? It's because the educational establishment has allowed it to happen. And when we look back at education secretaries over the last 30 years, and I've worked with a lot of them, they failed. I mean, basically, you look around you now, how did we get into this state? Because people lack courage. the teaching profession lacks courage. We've got to stand up and be more robust. We need fairness. We need to treat people equally. But to go on about white privilege when it isn't actually going to help anybody, and it's going to actually damage white working class kids most of all, and give a sense of grievance to black kids, that is pretty rotten. That's pretty cruel. So how have we got here? Because we've had incompetent, useless governments of whatever political persuasion in the last 30 years. I've been telling them this for 30 years. But they, you know, sometimes they look. I have dealt with lots of education secretaries, with the possible exception of David Blunkett, happened to be Labour, who was, I think, probably quite good. They've been useless, you know. And Zahawi's in there now, and he'll be a creature of the Department for Education. Dominic Cummings, you can love him or hate him, but he gets a few things right. He said that when he worked for Michael Gove as an advisor in the Department for Education, when he walked into the Department for Education, it was like walking into a lunatic asylum. It hasn't changed. It is still like that. And that's what Zahawi's going into. And he's got to do as he's told. And he'll come out and he won't change anything, because nothing ever changes in education, because the blob, the educational establishment, always wins. It's incredibly difficult to change anything. But look, we can learn lessons from other countries, because if you go to poorer countries like Vietnam, where kids are the poor countries, they're a long way ahead of us. How come that children who are suffering from probably low expenditure, some of these countries in Eastern Asia don't have much money per head, but they do far better than us. Even in Europe, Poland, Estonia, they do far better than us. Why is it? Because they teach sensibly. They teach what's important, which is literacy, numeracy, and the main subjects, not about racial equality, which is mainly a distraction.
Because, as I say, there's no doubt that Nadim Zahawi's heart is in the right place here, but the way he's speaking comes over like gentle advice. I would suggest he should crack the whip and just say, this must end now.
Yeah, it's very difficult for these education secretaries. I mean, I go back all the way to, Keith Joseph, Ken Baker. That was a very, very long time ago in the 80s. Some of them have tried a little bit, but basically they don't understand their job. So look, he's a career politician, for heaven's sake. What does he know about education? I've taught for 35 years and I've worked with kids ever since. I know quite a lot. But does he turn now to the CRE? Look, they don't. The Campaign for Education were one of the few voices which actually has something to say. Yes, we get called in occasionally, but at the end of the day, they don't listen to us. But then 10 years later or 20 years later, they say, yeah, you were right all along. You know, so what we were saying 30 years ago, you can check it out about, for example, how to teach reading using phonics, the sounds of letters. Now everybody agrees with. 30 years ago, we were heretics. I'm a historian. I've sat on the National Curriculum Working Party, was writing the history curriculum. And let me tell you something, that the National Curriculum for History in this country does not require the teaching of any specific event from British history. There are examples of British history you can teach, but nothing specific. Now, there's not an MP in Parliament who understands this, because they don't read it. You haven't got to teach World War I, World War II, Churchill, Magna Carta, the Reformation. No, it's all left to the teacher. It's a free-for-all. So how do we get like this? Because it's Sex Pistols history. It's anarchy. And it's anything goes.
Well, it strikes me that there's no doubt that educational standards in this country have plummeted. Last year, they didn't even have to take exams. And I think they're talking about kids won't have to take them again this year. How does that help them?
Well, it's a bit like asking football managers to predict the results of their team. That's how reliable it is. So if you ask the manager of the football team, how your team going to do, that's what it's like now. The teachers predict the results. Well, actually, next year they should take exams, but they're going to be watered down exams. So, for example, if you take a GCSE in French, it won't include a spoken component. It's a joke. We're about 3 years behind the best countries in the likes of Singapore, China, Vietnam, Japan. We're about 3 years behind by international comparisons. So we are falling behind, and a country, as an economy, we simply cannot afford to do this. One day we're going to hit reality. We need skilled workers, and we're not getting them.
Why have we allowed this to happen to our education system? Used to be second to none. Though I say so myself, when I was at school, it was a pretty damn good system. How has it come to this? Why have we allowed this to happen?
Look, we're the only country in the developed world where grandparents outperform their grandchildren. And it's happened because certain people have taken over education. I'm a trade unionist myself. I sat on the TUC, but I'm interested in poor kids particularly doing well. And certain people with very strong political opinions, often they're well-intentioned, but the path to hell is paved with a good intention. They want equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity. And that's why. If you want equality of outcome, you do what we're doing. If you want equality of opportunity, that's very different. So you go to Singapore, and they have equality of opportunity. They don't look for equality of outcome. Our aim in education is to keep everybody happy. But of course, you can't do that because some kids will fail. And also, we need horses for courses. Some kids need to be on vocational or technical training in schools which are more geared towards jobs, and others need to go off to university. But at the moment, 50% of kids go into university, but you can't get a plumber or electrician or a roofer or a hairdresser. You can't get these people. So we have gone off the rails. It's a disaster. Thank God you're covering it on Talk Radio.
Well, Chris, keep up the good fight. It's always a pleasure to talk. We'll talk again soon. Chris McGovern there, he is chairman of the Campaign for Real Education, with some very strong words. I'm sure you'll agree.